Thank you. And if I can ask our panelists to join us for our next panel, Hanadie and Greg. And okay, have a seat. Fantastic. All right, welcome. So actually, we are going to talk about clocks a little bit. And specifically, we're going to also talk about a subject that's rarely talked about at aging conferences, and that's female menopause. Okay, it's kind of like the sort of it's something that I guess, since I guess most of the scientists are men, menopause is not really a thing because they don't go through it and they don't have all the equipment to go through that 28-day cycle, and so therefore it's not really talked about very much. But I'm going to talk about it. We have some women on our panel, obviously, and so they know something about it, and we even have a few men there too. So I think they know something about it as well. So just to kind of keep things kind of balanced. So, but about the clocks, and just really briefly, so female menstruation, which is something that stops after female menopause, starts, again, clockwise, during adolescence, which takes place, plus or minus around the age of 12 or 13 in women, about the same time in men, except men obviously have different equipment and so on and so forth. But female menstruation starts during puberty, okay? And again, there are a bunch of organs that men don't have that go through this 28-day cycle. Again, clock, right? It's a clock. And most women are relatively regular. Some women are not because it's hormonally driven, okay, the whole process. And it's broken up into two phases. And there's the maturation of the egg, and then there's the uterine changes with the bleeding at the end, and then the cycle repeats and repeats and repeats, okay? And if you look at the hormone profile of that, that is also repeating as well, because there's certain hormonal patterns that are followed again and again and again. But unfortunately, when we get into menopause, things change drastically. So I think that's just a little bit of a primer. But if you can, I'm going to start with Greg Fahy, because he knows quite a lot about hormones, and if maybe he could also just address why don't we talk about this, and maybe just talk a little about how because basically what we'd like to do, and we also talked about this as well, is the social consequences. Women are having children later, they're having families later, mainly because they want to have careers and so on and so forth, so they're delaying childbirth. Okay, and so that's something that's happening all around the world in developed countries, and it's a thing. And some women are really, I guess, they're worried about it. Now, how long should I wait? And so it's a real issue that I'd like to address. And one last thing I want to mention before we get started with the panel, and you're going to hear it here first. So 30 years ago, I coined this word called phenomics, and 30 years later, I'm going to coin a new thing. It's called behavioral phenomics. And we could talk about that. And during menstruation, women's behavior changes because of all the hormones changing and so on. So that can be basically categorized as a behavioral issue that basically changes the phenotype, okay? And so behavioral phenomics was invented today, I don't know what the date is, to the 3rd of May, 2026, so here we go. All right, so let's get started with Greg, have at it.
Thank you, Steve. So the question that was posed as a topic of the panel is, why is not menopause discussed more at aging meetings? And I don't know the answer to that question, but I'm pretty good at speculating, so I'll say what I think. So usually what you hear about at aging meetings is what people are working on. So if nobody's actually working on reversing menopause, you're not going to hear much about it. So the next question would be, why are they not working on it? I think there's a variety of reasons for that. But one reason is, I have to go this way? Okay, yeah, thank you.
We're catching on here.
Yeah, you have to speak to the nub, right, exactly. So just to get into the biology of it a little bit, so the following information is current, right up to date as of 1980, when I first knew something about this. So 1980, I almost joined the lab of Caleb Finch. And Caleb was interested in the menopause and how that was clocked. And according to him, there's really two problems that lead to menopause in women. One of them, of course, we all know about, and that's the depletion of ovarian inventory. So you have fewer oocyte progenitors available in the ovary. But that actually is not the whole story. You still have many left over at the time menopause takes place. But there's another clock that I think is a little bit more mysterious. I'm not sure if it's been looked at in detail yet, but apparently the female body counts the number of cycles. And so there's actual changes in the brain, the part of the brain that senses estrogen. And Caleb Tuck-Finch characterized that as damage. I'm not sure if I would characterize it as damage. I'd be more like what Mike was saying. It's more like a change in the biology of that part of the brain. But in any case, if you want to do something meaningful about menopause on a practical basis, you have to deal both with oocyte replacement and also this change in the brain. Now, that's not to say the technology doesn't exist to tackle these things. I think it does. But then you get into other questions such as, is there any demand for this? And what are the societal implications of it? There was a woman who gave birth at the age of 55 in the UK about 30 years ago. And I thought it was fantastic, but there's a lot of pushback because people just thought women should not be having kids at that age. And you can kind of see some of the reasons. Is she really going to be able to take care of that kid? Is it fair to the kid? There are other issues like, will there be birth defects? The reason that menopause evolved may have been because oocytes are susceptible to DNA damage, which will accumulate over your life. So there's all kinds of issues like that. So I think, just up front, my guess as to why you don't hear more about this is that people just have a lot of confusion about what to do about it and whether they should do anything about it. But I'll just stop there and give somebody else a chance.
Thank you, Greg. That's fantastic. And by the way, men are different. Yeah, I know that's kind of hard to understand, but it is true. So men obviously can reproduce, many of them, into the 80s, and many do, actually. Robert De Niro, I think, is one of them. Al Pacino, I think we all know who those are. But they fathered children in their 80s, okay? So men, the testosterone decline is far less pronounced than the estrogen decline in women, right? So there is a difference. I'm going to ask Princess Haya questions, and this is regarding to Hevolution. Does Hevolution have any mandate or any interest in this subject and basically how they're slowing it down or preventing it altogether? Because I just want to say one more thing. After menopause is over, that's when all the cancers start to happen, right? And so it's a huge, huge problem. Again, kind of a root cause like we've talking about. If you want to prevent all those cancers, the ovarian, the uterine, the breast, all that kind of stuff, maybe we should delay menopause and maybe they'll delay all the cancers.
Thank you for your question. But before I answer the question, if I can just elaborate on what you just mentioned. I think menopause is a very important focus area for multiple reasons, because I truly believe that it is a mix of a functional decline that happens to women, but at the same time, I think it's also an evolutionary process. There are so many theories. I'm interested in this topic very much. There are so many evolutionary theories out there on why do women stop having children at some point in time. And you can see there's one interesting theory that's called the whale theory, or grandmother theory, which is a very interesting theory that they see in whales. Whales stop having children because grandmothers can not have any competition with their daughters or their female daughters, and at the same time can share or can share their experience with younger female whales. So what I'm trying to say, it's a very complicated topic that I believe has multiple areas to focus on. Now, in terms of Hevolution, I completely agree with Dr. Felipe's comment or slide that showed that we really need to consider the difference in our biology. I mean, it's an XY fact. Now, what scientists see today in terms of mice, female mice react differently to male mice, and to be honest, today you can see in certain labs that there might be, or there is some bias, and even with mice when you when you look at preclinical trials. So what I'm trying to say is, I think this topic is something that's interesting. The topic has to be investigated more. Hevolution is definitely considering understanding it a bit more, and I think it's still a black box that needs to be tapped on. I'm very interested also in the evolutionary theories of what we see, and I think there's a lot of potential.
Thank you so much. That's a great answer. And I think we're going to go like boy, girl. Here we go. So next in line, just to kind of keep it good. So I'm going to ask this question of Dr. Cole here. So, and Dr. Cole, I believe your wife studied reproductive endocrinology and reproduction in general, and so I know you guys talk a lot, and I wonder if you could maybe talk a little bit about, as far as just the timing of it, why 45 years old approximately, and what's driving it, and just maybe talk about the hormonal aspects, because obviously we all know that hormones are responsible for that whole cycle, and that when it kind of stops, the hormonal cycle, the pattern really goes almost in a chaotic kind of a fashion and ends up at the end of it in sort of a very different configuration. And again, you might want to talk about what's driving that, what's actually responsible for all those patterns and signaling, and how we can maybe address it and slow it down. Yeah.
So before I try mansplaining what my wife knows about, let me just I want to get back to one other question, which is sort of why we are where we are. And I had a conversation with Dr. Sierra about this, which is basically that the reason everybody's got a disease is because of the FDA. You have to get your VCs to invest in something with a return, which is aging's not a disease. You have to have a disease for your drug. And so what you've heard is everybody connecting their research that's got a company with some disease or another for that explanation. It's essentially regulatory. And I don't know if you want to comment on it, but okay.
Say something, yeah. Aging is really not a disease, right? It's just something that happens like the sun comes up, so that needs to change.
Yeah, so then when I talk about supplements, the ridiculous thing is that you can say for a supplement and a claim, it's affecting, healthy aging. So you'll see this in all the supplement claims, but you can't make it with an FDA claim. So you can look at you have to adapt to the regulatory absurdities. So I just wanted to make that comment because I think that explains a lot of what happens overall. So, and what has to change basically with interventions in clinical trials that are supported by investors, right? So, which is currently what the model, the paradigm. So, yeah, because this is your comment. I yield to the distinguished.
Thanks, Greg.
Have a seat. Join the panel.
No, so the thing we were talking about is a thing based on a lot of people think that we should define aging as a disease so that the FDA will accept it. I think that's a wrong way to go. Aging is not a disease. It happens to everybody. And diseases don't happen to everybody. So aging is not a disease. However, what's also a fact is that the mandate of FDA is not to cure diseases. The mandate is to improve health. And they can improve health irrespective of diseases. But because the biomedical business is all focused on the diseases, that's what the FDA does. So the answer is not to change the definition of aging to make it a disease. The answer is, let's talk to the FDA and convince them to follow what they are told to do.
Thank you. But I think that's a huge issue. So it's an elephant in the room issue, really relevant to anybody's attempt to do anything with VC money, right? So in terms of the neuroendocrine problems around the hypothalamic pituitary regulation, and which is a kind of programmed aging, which has a hypothalamic pituitary clock, and that it's responsible for menopause as part of this feedback system with ovarian aging. reason that we don't try to treat it is the same reason that I gave. We just have sort of a palliative care for people who have menopause, right? It's like, well, you had menopause, now we can do some inadequate hormonal replacement. And as you saw in Dr. Sierra's slide, the circadian rhythm clocks are huge, because if you take it from a physiological point of view, what you are doing is controlling the receptors and all of their agonists, and they have to be coordinated. So if you don't get the circadian regulation right, you can be having a tonic elevation of whatever it is you think is your anti-aging factor. So it's basically about coordinated circadian and clock regulation that's daily, monthly, etc.
Can I add something to that? Yeah, so this, again, may be confusing to some people or lay people, but let me give you a great example about hormones, okay? I think we all know somebody with type 2 diabetes, yes? And so you can imagine you're going out to dinner, and the individual takes a shot of insulin before dinner, and maybe they give themselves a little bit too much accidentally. Okay, fine. But what happens if, for example, there's a fire in the kitchen and everybody needs to run outside? Now they've shot themselves full of insulin and they won't be eating anything. You know what's going to happen to them? Not really anything good. So timing is really important in hormone release, hormone injection, and so that's why circadian rhythm, hormone delivery at the right time, at the right concentration, the right pattern is really important. Yeah.
Well, I don't want to suck up too much of the time here, but I think that the basic concept is always that it's the regulatory elements that are missing from most people's therapeutics. They give you a constant dose of some drug, tonically applied, right? So it's like, elevated. So, and then they say, well, we've proven that doesn't work. If you went to IGF-1 as downstream from GH, it would be the same issues. For the female hormones, if you just go look at the HRTs that have been done, they're inadequate, right? Yeah. They're in horses, equine. I mean, if you look at the data in the women's health off of, what horse piss basically, it's absurd, right? So understanding the proper regulation is essential, and if you go look at the new safety data, as you were pointing out, it's a whole lot safer than people thought. Yeah, so, anyway.
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, and I'll give it to, yeah. So, and also I want to add one more thing. The Women's Health Initiative in the year 2000 basically said that HRT will increase your rate of cancer. And pretty much all HRT was stopped for 20 years, okay? Now, there are women now taking, hormone replacement therapy, but the delivery method is it's Victorian or antique or I can't think of Byzantine. Oh, there you go. It's Byzantine. I mean, it's ridiculous how hormones are delivered, and unfortunately, it relies on the individual to take the right hormone at the right time. And hey, like, come on, right? And I mean, it should be automated. Maybe a computer do it because computers don't forget, and so on and so forth. And who said that? Put up your hand. Yes. And personalized. Absolutely. Thank you, Shannon.
Just a quick comment. I don't think there's one size fits all for women. Yeah, so personalized, that's why I was actually just going to say this. The issue today, I think, with women is that women at a certain age have to have preventative care. The reason why it's a domino effect. If one hormone goes down, then it's a domino effect. You're going to have osteoporosis and so on, and multiple diseases, exactly, and frailty and so on. Exactly, but what's interesting is that women, this process gets triggered at different rates for different women. So some women develop menopause in their early 50s, others have early menopause in their early 40s. It would be really interesting to know why and what's the trigger. It could be resilience, it could be loss of resilience in some sort of pathway that happens, which triggers this process. So what I'm trying to say is, I think understanding this will help all of these biomarkers and understanding when to start this preventative care in the clinic. And I think there's a lot that has to be done in that perspective. Thank you.
Yeah, so that's another kind of problem is it's personalized. Okay, everybody's different. It's not a moving target, but there's a million things to shoot at. Okay, it's not just one thing. It's like how many people in the world? Like 3 billion things, right? That's kind of tough for a biologist to deal with. Give us something simple that everybody has, like a lot of people have, and it all looks the same, and the solution's the same. But menopause, you know, I mean, it's tough. Okay, and so I think we need to make people more aware of this thing, and we need to get people more looking at it from a research point of view. Okay, maybe it's difficult, but again, we have like AI, we have computers, we have all kinds of these resources now. Maybe it's not as hard as we think it is, and maybe we need to reach out to people and tell them this is solvable. And again, Melissa did a great job letting people know about stem cells and how important they are, and raising all this money for it. Maybe we need to do something for female menopause.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm inspired that we're having this conversation here at this conference, and I'm so pleased that I know that Dr. Garan is interested in this, and I'm looking forward to collaborating with him, as he knows, in some ways on this topic. Thrilled to hear about Dr. Fahy's work, really happy to hear Dr. Cole being interested in it as well. As Princess Haya said yesterday, public sentiment is one of the most important things about the work that we all collectively do. I'm not a clinician or a scientist, but I love to support your work. So thank you all for the work that you do. And I think that going back to the original question that Dr. Fahy was also trying to address for this panel, why isn't this talked about at more conferences? Well, because we need more Steve Garans. But really, it's public sentiment. And if you talk to organizations around the world focused on menopause, like I have actually started to do as part of my work building the Health Span Action Coalition, because women. And what I hear is there's a lot of stigma about it, for example, across Africa, and it differs certainly by country, but it actually will differ by town, by village, the different ways that this is stigmatized and not talked about. And then even in places where we have wonderful scientists and wonderful clinicians that we can go to, it's actually still something that we don't talk about that much as women in the US, if we're honest. And we certainly don't talk about, oh, wow, well, this is happening, and I should be thinking about how I should address it in my life, and I'm going to go to my doctor, and that person will automatically know exactly what needs to be done. Not, right? So, and I know, you know, we don't want to spend all of our efforts trying to educate the public to move the needle on these things, but with something like just trying to foster the conversation that then drives good policy, that then just brings a clinician in Kansas to know about this, right? Public sentiment is important. I know a little bit about that because in California, to get ballot initiatives passed, first you have to get 1 million signatures. You got to get 1 million people to put their signature on a form to get on the ballot, and then you have to get millions of people to vote yes. Well, to do that, we need a coalition. That's one of the reasons that I'm starting to talk to menopause-focused organizations around the world. And again, I just want to say thank you to Dr. Garan for putting this on the agenda of this conference. We could have had so many things. Yes, a round of applause. Thank you. And with that, shall I hand it to Hanadie? Oh, okay, please.
You know, another thing too, just about the outreach, I mean, your physician, I mean, if you go to a physician and you ask for HRT, it's a 50-50 crapshoot. Well, no, your increased cancer is not worth it. I mean, just deal with it, right? And then if somebody else, and it really depends where you go. So HRT is even a thing that you may get, you may not get, depending on who you see as your physician. So that also needs to be changed. Go, yeah.
Just say one more thing. And I know that you brought up the Women's Health Initiative, and that research was done in the 90s at NHLBI. That's who funded it anyway.
But it was debunked like 3 years ago. The statistics were wrong.
Yes, thank you for saying that. So this is actually a really important part of underscoring what public sentiment can do. So some of you may remember this. In the 70s, HRT started to be used. I don't know how widely in the US, I wasn't part of it, but it was being used, and then there was research in the mid-70s that said, oh, it causes cancer. We shouldn't be doing this. And then in the 80s, there was research done that said, oh, well, if you combine estrogen with progesterone, it's actually okay again. So we started doing it again. And then the Women's Health Initiative research, what they did was odd, by the way. If you have time, you should definitely read about this if you're at all interested in public sentiment. So what happened is they're doing this research funded by the NIH, and they want to publish it, but they're not really certain about it. So what do you do when you're not certain about something? You hold a press conference and you tell everybody about it, even though you're not certain about it, even though nobody ever holds press conferences about research, right? This isn't like Microsoft buying Oracle or something. So anyway, they held a press conference. And guess what? It was on the Today Show. It was in USA Today. And guess what? All the women across the US themselves, not their doctors, guess what they thought? Hormone replacement therapy, bad. So then it took decades to get it back to the place where women wanted to look into it, where doctors were willing to have the conversation if they knew anything about it. So anyway, public sentiment.
Yeah. Yeah, I think. All right, I'll just
Say what's on your mind.
exactly have some
To the nub.
closing thoughts here. I think for so many, there are a few thoughts actually I'm having. One is, for so long, people have looked at really menopause just from the lens of fertility, but we know that it's so important for overall health span and longevity. And for many women, especially in my shoes, who are in their late 30s, we find ourselves at the pinnacle of our executive or our careers. I'm at the peak of my physical health, and yet our ovaries at this age are considered geriatric. In fact, the ovaries are aging roughly 5 times faster than every other organ. This is a major question in aging biology, longevity, and health span. And I, learned through the Buck Institute's new Reproductive Center for Longevity and Equality through Dr. Jennifer Garrison, that the later you actually get menopause, the longer you're likely to live. And we all know, the longer you're going to live in healthy years. And even women who genetically are predisposed to later menopause, their male siblings are also living longer. So there definitely is, just like Princess Haya mentioned, a genetic basis that we should learn more about. And ultimately, the ovaries is a secreted organ that is critical for estrogen for many factors. And once it prematurely dies off through the depletion of follicles, that leads to a cascading effect in women, from increased inflammation to the loss of bone density, muscle wasting, metabolic dysfunction, cognitive decline. So if we can actually look at it more from the lens of promoting health span and extending health span, if we can delay menopause and preserve our follicles, not just the Band-Aid of hormone replacement therapy, which, at least there is a Band-Aid, available, that's unfortunately still stigmatized. If we can really find ways, regenerative ways to really preserve and maybe even replenish the ovarian follicles, that will lead to longer health span and women living a decade or even decades longer in good health. And given that we're 50% of the population, I think this is crucial. And for men, it's also related to men, given that there is a relationship between women and when they get menopause and also their male relatives. And so I think there's a lot we can learn and a lot we need to do by actually actively funding companies that are supporting follicle regeneration and the preservation of ovaries, in addition to the hormone treatments.
Thank you, Hanadie. That was amazing. And I also want to do so I'm going to put out some questions here, ask some questions to the panel here, but I also want to say 2 things. And Greg, correct me if I'm wrong, because I guess you were around in 1962. I'm only 28, so I wasn't around then. So yeah, so Yeah, you weren't around either, right? But correct me if I'm wrong. John F. Kennedy said we choose to go to the moon not because it is easy, but because it is hard. Well, I'm going to put a challenge out to everybody. Everybody here in this auditorium was born of a woman. A woman gave birth to you. Everybody here, okay? So do them a favor and do something not because it's easy, because it's hard. And let's try to figure it. Thank you. Well, thank John F. Kennedy, because I'm just paraphrasing him, okay? So let's try to understand why, like we know female menopause happens. Let's understand what drives it. Let's try to understand how to slow it down and delay it maybe indefinitely. And you're absolutely right, Hanadie. If we can do that, we will extend the lives of women. So there is definitely a aging component here, big time. And I also want to do a shout out to my wife, because I wouldn't be here with my beautiful wife, Irene Garan. Would you please stand up? No, stand up. By the way, she's very shy. I want you to stand up. I will not continue unless you stand up. So I'm going to just stand here. Thank you. Okay, there you go. All right. Thank you, Irene. All right. Good. Thank you. So as they say, every man has a woman standing behind her. My wife stands in front of me, and I follow her, okay? All right, thank you. Brian, and after she led me out of here yesterday, she made me leave here, so I followed her, as I should do. There you go.
In terms of the question of delaying menopause, I'm just curious about any knowledge about studies of like female twins. Do those people have the same like tighter correlation on dates and other female siblings? Like, does that tighten things up? And the other question was, there has been hormone replacement therapy, and did any of them in any kind of treatment say, well, and then that seemed to delay when menopause occurred because they were on hormone treatment before the occurrence of menopause?
So I can answer that question. No, because you basically have to mimic the menstrual cycle hormones, and there's quite a number of them, and you need to match the pattern, because again, it's basically like we talked about, or I talked about the other day. It's like a symphony, and if the music doesn't sound right, then the audience is not going to be listening very well, and likewise, the audience is the human anatomy, and that's what the conductor is telling it to do. And if it's not done in a coordinated fashion, you're going to end up with dissonance, okay? Dissonance, anatomical behavior, and that's a bad thing. And in fact, that's what kind of menopause is. It's a dissonant behavior of the anatomy, okay? And so, so right now, a hormone replacement therapy is done as a kind of a therapeutic, not anything that will delay it or anything like that. And so, yeah. But does anybody want to comment on that, by the way? Yeah, Greg.
I don't know the answer to this, but maybe somebody here does. So there are forms of birth control that prevent cycling, can do that for long periods of time. And so if you shut off the cycles for, say, a year or 2 or 3, does that extend the reproductive lifespan of the woman by the same amount? Does anybody know?
I definitely don't know.
All right. Good question. Okay, well, if anybody knows the answer, please put your hand up. But we have another question over here. All right. This gentleman asked a question earlier about clocks. Well, this is definitely clock-driven, because what happens is there's puberty, there's menopause, and that all happens sort of within the same time frame of everybody. Yeah. Okay.
Hello, I'm Byron again. This is all related to my theory of aging. So I kind of look at the entire human lifespan before and after birth, including parents back and so forth, at the mitochondria level too. But basically, there's this phenomenon of like fetal microchimerism. There's like also this example of cows where males pass on infertility to cows. So there's these examples of both parents involved in infertility and aging. But over time, like back to this balance is like, are we passing on aging in indirect pathways that we aren't looking at? For example, if you have a fetal microchimerism, you're getting both sets of father and mother MHC presentation through the child itself. And then you talk about like different levels of like, if a different father later on, like, can we tie this late stage menopause to how many children women have, how many different fathers she interacted with over time?
Okay, well, first of all, the menstrual cycle is driven by the hypothalamus, okay? So the exquisite timing of all these hormones, and I'm not going to go into them all because it's complicated and they have different patterns and this and that. That whole, literally, I mean, if you remember my talk from yesterday, that whole symphony is driven by the hypothalamus. And so, and likewise the daily cycle too, okay? So there's number of cycles embedded in so again, it's hard. And then, of course, you got, as I said, every woman has a different, pattern. So it's super hard, okay? And so, but I don't care. I'm looking into it, and my group is looking into it with a bunch of other things that we're doing too. So we're definitely looking at menopause, and we're just trying to figure out what it looks like. And actually, we are, So we have a lot of people looking at this, but it's difficult. Again, it's a pattern within a pattern within a pattern, and they're all different. So yeah, tough problem. So yes, Irene, yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
So you raised an interesting question about twin studies, familial studies. My opinion that I'm going to say now is just a personal observational opinion. There are some families that have early menopause within the family, and where it's passed on through generations. So there's a lot of genetic predisposition in those type of observations. Now, is it a rare form? Is it a common form? How do you distinguish between them? I think this is something that's very interesting. And I'm sure it is highly investigated, but I don't have enough information to share. But I think these things exist, and you can see these trends, and you can see these genetic predispositions that are actually, some of them are known and highly published.
Thank you so much. Irene has a question, yeah.
What a wonderful panel. So I have a question. Would we even have a menopause or andropause if we stopped, delayed, attenuated the fundamental process of aging? Kind of provocative question, I understand. But looking from the other side of the same coin, we try to prevent menopause. But what if we just attenuated or prevented progression of aging before we are 50 years old?
Does anybody want to take that on? Greg, yeah. And this will be our last question. It was pointed out to me that we're going a little bit long, so that's my fault. I guess I don't have access to a clock. See what happens when your clock goes wrong or you lose sight of it? There you go. This is our last. All right. Thank you, Carl.
So I wanted to link that up to things we've heard today. Brandon described senescent neurons, and you've described the loss of function in a clock that's hypothalamic. If you look at those neurons, you have a poster presented here that shows that there's actual loss of those neurons. And Brandon linked this to the senescent cell phenotype driven by NF-kappa B. And I showed you a slide earlier on manipulating the upstream of that pathway, the IKK pathway upstream of the NF-kappa B. I would tell you that part of the process is happening actually in those neurons, whether you want to, and these things are all linked. So what you're hearing about, it might sound like it's coming from a lot of different directions, but it's actually nicely linked and in relationship to neuroendocrine control overall and reproductive aging. You can see across the primate species this sort of 5-to-1 ratio for lifespan and the age of reproductive maturity. So the clocks are related to the life cycle built in, and the whole system is integrated. So if you could attack it at a more basic level, then you could influence the entire system, but there's a great deal of complexity. I hope that's not, I hope that sort of partially answers Irina's question.
Yeah, I mean, there's a great, again, the other factor that, again, Shannon pointed out, it's not just the complexity, it's individuality, right, because everybody's different, and so that's what makes it hard, okay? But that's okay, we can deal with hard I'm sorry? Oh, no, I think we're okay. I think, let me just see, I think we're kind of done here as far as our morning program. Let me just double check here, make sure I'm not wrong here. No, this is it, yeah. So please give the audience, please give the panel a round of applause. And it is break time. Okay, we have coffee, we have desserts and snacks, so we're going to take a bit of a break, go out and enjoy yourself and talk, and please, it's something that we should consider is let's address this problem. Thank you, guys. Yeah.